Pro-gun Americans, what's the reasoning behind bringing your gun for errands? The chances that my house will burn down are low, but I still have a fire extinguisher. A concealed carry gun is like a fire extinguisher for muggers, mass shooters, etc. So I can make pancakes with it. What the fuck do you think I have it for? That's probably the best time to bring it. You should always be armed, you never know when you could need it. Because I am a woman. Because I feel more safe with it. Because I would be forever grateful for it if I were ever in a situation that I needed it. Because it is my right. Like I'm tall at almost 5 feet 11 inches but I'm still a woman and I'm only 145 pounds lol. I cannot overpower anybody. My height can give an impression but once you look at my noodle arms I'm not physically imposing. We had a guy shoot up a local supermarket. Just flipped out and killed one random guy indiscriminately. Also I'm a lesbian and when my girlfriend moves to live with me we might get assaulted in public. It's likely not gonna happen but I'd rather conceal carry and don't need it than wishing I had it when I needed it. Bingo. The great equalizer for women. Better than waiting for hours on a cop after you call because you got mugged or even worse raped. I was waiting for this comment. It's the same logic as women carrying mace around. When you know that half the population can overpower you with zero effort just by sheer muscle and skeletal structure, it changes the way you view things. As a woman, I know my best chance will always be to run if I can. The only part that deviates from the analogy is that guns are potentially lethal weapons in a way that mace is not. It doesn't have the possibility of misfiring or accidental incidents. It's also different from weapons like knives, which can also be lethal, but is a slower process with more room to assess the situation, rather than lethality being dependent on an immediate trigger reaction. I do feel it's irresponsible for a modern society to not at least do the bare minimum to ensure some standard is set for ownership. For example, I feel things like severe and recurrent psychosis, and people with violent criminal histories should be disqualifiers. Honestly, I feel like this criticism of packing heat for even small, casual errands thing is targeted more often at men. The self-defense angle is important, like keeping mace in your purse, but a huge part of this conversation is that guns can turn what are usually non-lethal encounters into some guy impulsively pulling his gun out in anger over a slight, like because someone looked at his girlfriend wrong. This subgroup of men is extremely small, but it only takes a few to devastate the lives of so many. I'm Canadian and we don't have any sort of gun culture, although there are certainly people who own guns. It's more common in more rural or remote areas and some indigenous groups who practice subsistence hunting, although recreational firearm ownership is also a thing. Like having a gun exclusively to use at firing ranges/centers as a leisure activity. Going to ranges with a buddy on the weekends and competing to see who can hit a bullseye on a target is perfectly legitimate as a fun hobby, IMO. I think it's perfectly fine to own a firearm as long as it's well regulated. Basic background check, licenses that require periodic renewal, demonstration that you have the proper knowledge and training to understand how guns work and how to use them, e.g. requiring attendance at a brief session along with other applicants, and strict laws on things like proper gun storage. Although uncommon in Canadian culture, I think a responsible adult who is, reasonably, mentally stable, has capacity for a full understanding of what gun ownership entails/requires, and without a history of violent crime, should be able to own a firearm. Just because my belief that gun ownership by an average citizen is not a good thing, my views should have no bearing on the autonomy and how my neighbor chooses to live their life as long as they're not hurting anyone or infringing upon the rights of others. I started carrying a gun after my ex began stalking me. It started with death threats and escalated from there. I moved halfway across the fucking continent and back. They kept finding me. I had unlisted numbers when everyone still had landlines, but somehow they would get them and fill my answering machine. Yes, I'm old, with long crazy ass rants about what they were going to do to me or pay to have done to me. what they were going to do to my family. They kept turning up, at my new apartment, my job, even a fucking funeral. They'd stake out my relatives' houses around the holiday. Every car I bought ended up vandalized. The cops in multiple states did nothing. They wouldn't even take the 30 seconds to listen to the answering machine messages. About 4 or 5 years into, I came home one night and went to bed, only to be woken up with a butcher knife to my throat. Adrenaline is a wonderful thing. I got away, somehow had the presence of mind to grab my keys on the way out the door. It was cold as fuck and I only had on my underwear. I got to my car and drove around until I found a payphone. I called the cops and they damn near arrested me when they could finally be bothered to show up. Meanwhile, my apartment and all my shit got absolutely destroyed. It didn't stop until they finally pulled the same shit on someone who the cops actually gave a fuck about. Once they were in the system, they eventually became institutionalized. So, yeah, when that was going on, I bought a gun and learned how to use. I took the concealed carry course and it soon became an uncomfortable but reassuring lump of metal I carried around. After a while it got to be a habit. I just never stopped. There's been a couple of times I was very glad to have it since. I don't talk about it much because there's always some fucking self-righteous piece of shit who wants to judge me for it. It's half comforting, half annoying as fuck when people with no trauma lecture us about shit because they don't understand why we do it. It's good that there's still some people that aren't broken individuals like myself, but it's fucking annoying that said people always feel the need to share their opinions. I carry a knife with me at all times due to trauma and utility. Had someone ask me if I was a cop, I said no, asked why on earth I had a knife in my back pocket if I didn't need it, asked as if I was a psychopath. I explained that it's a utility tool before it's a weapon. They didn't seem to get it, so I tried explaining again to no avail. Surprise surprise, no luck explaining it to them a third time, and by the fourth I asked, "Do you ever need to open a bag or cut some line or something?" They said yes. I told them that that's what I use it for, and they asked me why I didn't carry scissors with me instead. You got out, even if your shit was destroyed. That sucks, but it is all shit at the end of the day. You are amazing. Fuck those people, you rock. Let me start by saying that I'm not hating or trying to do anything other than provide an alternative point of view. I have my CCP, 2 stamps and more money in guns than I'd like to admit, but I never carry in public. The problem with your analogy is that your fire extinguisher can't accidentally penetrate your kitchen wall and kill your neighbor. I'm proficient with every weapon I own and go to the range at least once a month where I practice all the fundamentals. It's an outdoor multi-bay range with berms in between each one, so you can practice much more than at most ranges. I have confidence in my ability to concealed carry if I chose to do so. But the chance of me accidentally harming a bystander, having the gun taken off me during a scuffle, having an ND, and generally having one more thing to worry about outweighs the even smaller chance of that gun saving my life or the life of another. Everyone thinks they're the exception to the rule. Everyone. All that said, if I lived in a more dangerous area, that equation might change. As it stands though, I think the vast majority of people who carry concealed are deluding themselves into thinking they're infallible and have a higher likelihood of doing harm than good. Overall, I'm tired of feeling unsafe, helpless, and victimized by men who are clearly in need of psychiatric help only to have the cops show up and shrug their shoulders. Wow. The rest is a natural reaction to this, but this is what is impressive about the US that is often overlooked. Just that there are people who go about their daily lives with this level of fear. I really understand that if I or anyone I knew lived with this level of fear, I would understand their need for protection. Lack of public health care, mental, and the over-budget police who are clearly not focused on prevention and de-escalation are clearly an issue that needs to be handled urgently. Because the police in the United States do not have a legal obligation to protect individual citizens. Even if they did have an obligation, it's not like you have a personal cop bodyguard. If you have to call the police, you probably don't even need a gun, barring a prolonged mass shooting or something. It's the situations where you don't have time to call the police that I'd want a gun. I person don't carry one, but I have the luxury of living in a nice neighborhood and working in a nice neighborhood. Nor do they have the desire. I learned long ago, your protection is your responsibility and nobody else's. I'm not American, but if I had the right to carry and had a firearm, why wouldn't I bring it with me? My concern aren't the people who are responsible and trained, but the people who get a power trip from owning and having a gun on them, especially in crowded areas. In a heated argument, some people will go straight to this deadly weapon, brandish their power and defense. Also, people should learn self-defense and how to disarm an opponent, because there are situations where you can't reach fast enough for a gun. I am definitely pro-guns and people should have a right to one, but the culture around it needs change. Kinda of how alcohol is viewed and treated differently here than in Europe. To protect myself and family. Really, it's quite simple. I'm sure the people in a Buffalo grocery store didn't think they'd need one to protect themselves. Or all those people in movie theaters, schools, malls, and churches. I don't expect I'll need a firearm, but I know I'm responsible for my self-defense, no one else. There's no reason not to. It doesn't bother me or anyone else around me for me to have it concealed on my hip, and if a situation arises that I end up needing it, I will certainly be glad that I took the extra 10 seconds to put it on.